relationships and nurturing them and shaping them in negative ways as well. Just to find all the research now, thankfully, we haven't done enough other than their narrative, and ultimately amazing or her responsibility. And last time England went to the World Cup, as soon as the squad was announced, he tweeted this out. After years of standing on the touchline in the cold, Mum, we're off to the World Cup. I love that. The first person that he wanted to congratulate was the person he recognises has put most into his career and into supporting him do that. Now, I know you can all unmute. I'm going to stop screen sharing if this will let me do that. Stop sharing. That's dangerous because we managed to get it to share. I'm going to put my camera on. Can I encourage you to pop your cameras on and to unmute for a moment? Because I'd like you to do something that is ridiculously cheesy and a little bit uncomfortable inducing. I'd like to park your British Reserve. My dad, who spent his entire life in the armed forces, would feel sick at this challenge. But I'd like you to give each other a jolly good British round of applause for doing what you've done to get your kids to this point in their sporting career and in every other part of their life as well. I like to do this when we are obviously face-to-face. It's a bit weird doing it over Teams, but I think I would thoroughly encourage you to do that. So would you join me in unmuting and just giving each other, if you put your cameras on, it's nice to see some people clapping each other as well. I don't know if you've got that facility, but let's join each other in giving each other a nice British round of applause for what you do for your kids. Let's go. Right, I feel uncomfortable. Let's stop there. Let's go back to screen sharing. But thank you for doing that. As much as it makes me feel uncomfortable, I do genuinely mean it. Without you, your kids would not be where they are now. Has that started sharing again? Someone please say yes or no. Is that sharing?
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you. Arthur Conan Doyle had his famous detective Sherlock Holmes say this: I frequently gained my first real insight into the character of parents by studying their children. Let me read that to you again. I first gained my first real insight into the character of parents by studying their children. Who here feels just a little bit nervous about what the staff at Stanford have decided about you as parents by their interactions with your children? The reality is the adage that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree isn't always true, but has a lot of truth in it. We are often a cocktail of the people who brought us up, and often that's our parents, and we're kind of sponge up their character, their way of doing things, a little bit of maybe mom or dad or whoever brought us up, and we are a reflection of that. Now the good news for us as adults is that we're not apples and we're not trees. We're human beings. We're flexible, we're not fixed. We can move. Anyone who's had a midlife crisis and gone, oh, I don't like where my tree is, and moved it, that's you've understood that you don't have to stay the same, and nor do our children have to just follow down our footsteps. But the reality is, when we're thinking about sport, the models that our children learn at home have a significant impact in the way in which they do sport. Let me give you an example. Your child has a shocker on the sports pitch, playing the sport that they love and the sport that you've funded and fueled. The way you as a family react to failure, whether it be sweeping it under the carpet, blaming others, being a bit of a victim, being really, really hard on yourselves, whatever, is going to impact the way your child handles that challenging event. And so the challenge for us as parents is to think about what type of character are we modeling. None of us do it perfectly, hence non-perfect dad, but how do we help our kids learn mindset, skills and character which will help them thrive on and off the sports pitch? The All Blacks, statistically the most successful sports team in history. There's a great book written by James Kerr called Legacy that just looks at some of the All Black culture and looks into why they're as successful as they are. Now, it's written by a fan, so it makes them sound like they walk on water. They're not quite that amazing, but they are pretty good. And James Kerr identifies that they have a rule in their team which is no Muppets. They actually say it a bit stronger than that, but I'll let you read the book and see how they say it. And it's a fascinating unpacking of the fact that to be given an All Black jersey, you have to display not only the physical and technical attributes, but you have to display the character attributes as well. And you and I have both worked on teams with somebody who may be very talented at what you do in your day-to-day life, but actually they're really hard work to work with, because their character, their mindset skills doesn't match up, and that makes them a very draining, hard work, tiring, conflict inducing person to be around, even if they're one of the most talented people on your team. So Alex Ferguson said that if he had the choice between a person who had exceptional talent but lacked grit and desire, or who had good talent but exceptional grit and desire, he would always choose the latter. Arguably, one of the best managers of a generation would choose to select players based on their character. And as I have the privilege of traveling around the sports world, this is something that I hear again and again and again, that selection is often based on the type of person they are rather than the skills that they possess. Now, by the way, I'm just going to say, at any point you want to ask questions, pop them in the chat box. Interrupt me. I really don't mind being interrupted at all. Why don't I mind being interrupted at all? Because look, I've got 3 kids. I'm interrupted all the time at home. But do interrupt me, ask me questions, challenge me on what I'm saying, ask for clarification if it doesn't make sense. These are my 3 children. This is a slightly old photo, but I like to say, look at him. Doesn't he love his sisters? Isn't that shining through? Caleb is 16. Thoroughly enjoying rugby at the moment. Anya in the middle is just like secondary school. She's a gymnast, and as a former prop, I don't understand the gymnastics world at all, but I love seeing her take part and enjoy that. And Jess on the right is really into drama. And I'm not non-perfect dad, because I'm the parents to these 3 awesome and incredibly annoying young people. I do non-perfect dad because I've spent 20 years working with families. I'm a Baptist church minister in Romford in Essex. I do that part-time, and then I work for Non-Perfect Dad for a couple of days a week. And for the last 20 years, I've worked in a number of different institutions, primarily supporting social services at the sharp and ugly end of safeguarding, working with very chaotic and conflict-orientated families. And then in the last 5 years, I've kind of fallen into the sports world, and I'm very fortunate enough to have a pretty cool bunch of clients who let me go in and try to scaffold some better conversations between parents and coaches, parents and kids and coaches. And so that's what I spend my time doing. And like I said earlier, I'm not here to tell you how to parent. I suppose I'm a parenting coach, but that's quite an obnoxious title. And it would be rather rude of me to tell you how to parent your kids. The principles we're going to look at tonight are for you there to kind of go away, reflect on, contextualize, and work out how they best fit into your home environment. For you, I've just started something that's like, it's not even launched, but I thought some of you guys might like to have a look at it. Just some resources to help parents avoid well-meaning mistakes that good parents like yourselves, you guys are clearly good parents because you're here tonight, and the opportunity just to kind of test out some resources for me if you spot any spelling mistakes or anything that's not quite right. But if you want to go to wellmeaningmistakes.co.uk, you can sign up and get some resources there as I unpack some of the mistakes that well-meaning parents like yourselves tend to make, and sports coaches as well, because some of you will be coaches in what you do. Anyway, enough of that. First thing we're going to look at is nurturing with balance. My favorite sports story is that of Katrina Douglas. Katrina Douglas won the British Open golf in the early 1980s as an amateur, beating professional women's golfers. And her dad was just an incredible mentor, coach, inspirer of her golfing journey. And sadly, he died 3 months before she won her first major. As the few press that covered women's golf in those days gathered around her and said to her, "Oh, your dad, he'll be looking down on you right now and he'll be so proud of you, won't he?" She silenced them by saying, "No, he won't." She went on to say, "My dad's pride was never affected by what I did with a little white ball on freshly cut grass. My dad was always proud of me." Now, I don't know about you, but I think that's some high benchmark parenting. Ask those 3 awesome kids of mine if I reach that level. They'll quite happily tell you that I don't with great regularity. But when I listen to that story of Katrina Douglas, and she's now a professor of psychology at Leeds Beckett's University, so she kind of knows her stuff. One of the things that we unpack, and it's quite a popular phrase, but it's got a lot of things to going for it, is that psychological safety. Katrina Douglas's dad created an environment where Katrina at a young age had the confidence just to go out and give it a go and not feel under parental pressure to do that. Now, subsequently, there's been lots of research about parents, and there's some interesting research by Collins, McNamara, and McCarthy. This is widely available on the web, and it's well worth having a look at. And they had a look at two groups of people. Well, they had a look at lots of people, but they landed up focusing on superstars and almost. Superstars were those who reached the top of their sport, and they looked at individual sport, team sports, Olympic disciplines, and they also looked at almost in the same sorts of sporting background, and almost were people who were, to be honest with you, compared to me, are phenomenally good athletes, but didn't make it to the top. They almost got there, whereas superstars were the ones who got there. And they tried to see if there were some common themes in those athletes' experiences and story that helped give a bit of understanding as to perhaps why they made it. Now, there's dangers of putting human beings in boxes, because human beings, I don't think, fit very neatly into boxes. But I still think this research is useful. They came up with 7 or 8, I can't remember off the top of my head now, 7 or 8 differences between superstars and almost. I want to just focus on 2 tonight, which I think are quite pertinent to parents. The first is that superstars had a slow, often bumpy progression, whereas almost had a smooth ride. They were labeled the next superstar, the next Johnny Wilkinson, Ronaldo, Sarah Hunter, whatever your child's sport is, that at an early age those children were labeled that. The challenge for us, for parents, is intuitively we know that if our kids have knee grazing experiences when they're children, it helps prepare them for life. But the challenge comes as parents, we don't like our kids being in pain. I don't know about you, I don't like my kids being in pain. That's a very normal, natural parental response. And so the challenge for that is we try to smooth our children's pain out, and so that they don't have to deal with the consequences of action. So at its most simple level, that's things like we may pack their bags often for them. We might make excuses for them. What maybe in the car journey on the way home when they've had a shocker, and they're self-reflecting, going, I didn't play very well. We don't like them thinking like that. So we went, oh, no, it was the ref's fault, or it was your teammate's fault, or it doesn't matter. So we kind of try and deflect from that. I'm sure Sir could tell you stories of parents who have emailed him late at night complaining about coaching styles or selection policies, game time policies, because parents have wanted children to have a smooth ride, and that, whilst understandable, actually is just really unhealthy for our kids. My wife has joined all the parent year group WhatsApp groups. She doesn't let me because she thinks I'll be rude in them, and to be fair, that's probably true. And when our middle child Jess joined secondary school, she got invited into the WhatsApp group, and she was sitting there going, it's really kicking off in the parents WhatsApp group right now. I'm glad you're not in it. And I was like, oh, now I'm super curious. Come on, what's going on? And she said, well, the geography teacher has set some homework. Nobody can work out what the answer is. And right now there are 100 parents, predominantly dads, I hasten to add, trying to work out what this geography homework is, so their little darlings don't go in on the first week of school and have to say to the teacher, so I didn't get the question. Turns out that the geography teacher made a massive typo in the way the question was asked, and so no one was ever going to get the question right. But for me, that just illustrates just trying to smooth that ride out. And as I meet lots of parents, well-meaning parents in sport environments, often the challenge for us is to allow our children to experience some bumps in the road. And this is going to sound brutal, but I don't think any child under 18, unless they're a swimmer or a ballerina or a gymnast, because those are pretty early maturation sports. We don't know who's going to be superstars yet. Most of our national main sports are what we call late maturation sports. We just don't know. Harry Kane was dropped from a football academy, and he's now England captain. So the challenge for us as parents is not to go, look at that, they're doing amazing, but to actually let them have some bumps in the road, and so that it helps their progression. The second area that I think is quite important is that superstars had supportive, encouraging, but staying distant parents, whereas almost had very high levels of parental interest and drive. Let me read that again. Superstars had supportive, encouraging, but staying distant parents, whereas almost had very high levels of parental interest and drive. The difference between these two parents is not always obvious. Both love their kids, both give their go and watch their kids play. Both are very proud of their kids. Both do provide all the practical needs to their kids. I think the main difference is that superstars, parents are pretty chilled out and know that they can talk about other things in life and have other things going on in life, whereas almost parents have a 17-point game plan in the car on the way to the sporting fixture and a 13-point review in the car on the way home, and they just don't know how to switch off. I've had the privilege of interviewing Sarah Hunter and Sarah Hunter's mum. Sarah Hunter's the England women's captain. I think she's now the most capped England player ever, beating Rocky Clark. And I just was talking to Janet and Sarah, and I was like, tell me about the Hunter family Christmas. You're a professional sportswoman. You know, what's it like when you get home for Christmas? Do you talk a lot of rugby? And her parents travel all over the world to watch her. In fact, actually, I was sitting next to her parents in a few international games. And but they said, no, we never talk rugby at Christmas. Maybe Sarah's big brother will take the mickey out of her for a drop catch or a missed try or something like that, or a bad TV interview, giving that sibling grounding. But most of the time they just do life together. And for me, that was a lovely illustration of what this is talking about. So that's the first kind of area that we want to talk about tonight, kind of how the kind of principles for nurturing that are, it's okay for our kids to have bumps in the road, and it's great that we're supportive, but we need to just hold ourselves back a little bit, recognizing that sport for lots of parents is a very emotional thing, and so it can be a little bit trickier for us to hold ourselves back. And I think the area that's hardest to do that is in the car journey. So we're going to kind of come in and focus on that for a bit now. And we're going to play a game. This might not work because we can't see each other, but I'm going to encourage some people to unmute and give me some answers. We're going to play a game called What's the Worst Thing You Can Say When? What's the worst thing you can say when? So firstly, who would be your local derby day? What would be the difficult fixture, the fixture with the most emotive feeling for you as a school? Who would your local rivals be? Who's going to be brave, unmute and tell us?
Oakham.
Oakham. Do you know the younger lot said that as well? I was just testing you all to see. Okay, Oakham. Sir, do you agree with that? Is it Oakham?
Yeah, I'd say they're the big ones.
Oakham
at home.
Oakham and who?
Oakham at home always seems to create some noise around town, certainly.
Cool, brilliant. Okay, so imagine now you're taking your child in their chosen sport to school, and you're dropping them off for them to travel, either travel to the Oakham fixture or it's an Oakham home fixture. What is the worst thing? Now, we're going to let our bad inner parenting out here. So what is the worst thing you can say to them in the car on the way to dropping them off at that fixture? We're not saying you've said these things, by the way. No one is phoning social services on you for what you say. So you know, your kids aren't here to confirm whether you've said it or not. So what is the worst thing you can say in that car journey? Unmute your mics and give us your most brutal parenting act going. Go on, what would you say?
You don't win, don't come home.
I love it. That's pretty stark. Don't win, don't come home. Thank you. What else might you say?
You do realise we've not lost for 5 years at home.
Ooh, I like that. That's a good bit of historical pressure. You do realise we're not excellent. Anybody else?
Using the D words, disappointed.
Nice. I don't want to be disappointed in you. Yeah. What about scaring them? Oh, they had a massive kid last year. I hope they're not playing today. They were really good. Yeah, brilliant. Okay, so you know, you realize that you can just crank up the pressure in the car on the way there. I'm sure none of you have said that. So let's just imagine now you're in the car on the way back from the Oakham fixture, and sadly you lost. I'm sure that's very difficult to imagine, but that is what we're going to do with this scenario. And your child had a shocker, and so they are feeling pretty despondent. You're feeling pretty despondent about how they acquitted themselves in their sport today. What is the worst thing you can say then in the car at that moment?
There's always the next game to make it better.
There's always the next game. Yeah, you can just ignore the pain. Okay, cool. What else can you say? Come on, let some of that bad inner parenting out. They've just lost to Oakham.
That's what happens when you don't try.
I like that. Yes, blame them entirely. Thank you. What else can you say?
Mum's going to be disappointed.
Oh, yes. Nice. Cool. Anybody got anything else? I think you can almost get into just a little bit of parental poetry here. You've let yourself down, you've let the team down, you've let your coaches down, but worst of all, you've let me down, I think is kind of some of the worst things you could say then. Look, I'm sure none of you have said anything quite as bad as that, but the reason I get you to start thinking like that is I'm sure also going on in your head is thinking like, actually, have I sometimes put them under a little bit of pressure on the way there? Or have I sometimes reflected disappointment in the car on the way home? So here's my kind of top tips for you to contextualize into your own home environment about the car journey. Firstly, on the way there, express pride and love. Okay, on the way there, express pride and love. And there's loads of research out there that just basically says that when we do something for our own internal motivators, that's a lot better than doing something for external motivators. Okay, and the challenge of being a parent is that after a sports fixture, particularly a team game, we might say to our children, did you win? Did you score? Were you player of the match? And the problem with those three questions, I think they're like the three ugly sisters of sports parenting questioning, is not that in and of themselves they're wrong, but if your child answers yes to any of those questions, you then as parents have a really lovely animated conversation about the goal they scored or the points they scored or why they won or whatever. And if they say no to all those questions, we tend to kind of turn the radio on and change the subject really, really quickly. And what our children accidentally learn, and it's not what you want them to think, I'm sure, is that I get really excitable, happy mum and dad when I perform really well. I must need to perform really well to receive love, acceptance, excitable mum and dad, or to please my bosses later on in life, etc., etc. And whilst for a short time that might help, we all know that there are moments in life where we don't succeed and that life is hard work, and that's just really, really unhealthy. So I would encourage parents on the way to a sporting fixture just to find some kind of cadence of saying to your kids, I love you, go have fun. Now, I've got 3 kids. I say it's slightly different to all of them because I know what their own unique character and needs are, and I've played around with it. With my eldest, it's kind of just go have fun, be yourself, which is a ridiculous sentence, really, because he can't be anything other than himself. But it's just that encouragement just to go. And I think the most important sentence of all sports parenting, which is, I really love watching you play. I just absolutely love watching you play. And I think that's true for most parents, even if it can be a bit stressful for us and a bit challenging for us. So express pride and love on the way. Secondly, if you get kind of nothing else from tonight's webinar, ask the question. And the question is taken from my best-selling Amazon book. There you go, cheeky plug. And the question is this: what do you want from me on game day and training day? This is a question. This is please, if you have one take home from tonight, make this the take home. Ask your kids, what do you want from me, your parents, on game day and on training day? And then just sit back and listen. And I ask my kids this question at least every term. And it's been fascinating for the last 6-7 years to see how their answers have changed as they've got older and gone through different phases. And Caleb's a pretty decent rugby player and is in a pathway. And so just seeing how he's answered that question differently. But for me, this is about letting them set the agenda. It's really important that our kids love sport. It's the only reason they'll carry on playing it. They might carry on playing it to please you for a while, but as soon as they get to university or leave home, they will stop playing it as quick as they can because they only did it to please you. Or they can play because they love it. And so when they leave home, they will find ways of carrying on being active and enjoying sporting life. And so it's really important we let them set the agenda for sport. And I see so many kids and I meet so many kids for whom parents set the agenda. And I land up doing a lot of one-to-ones with parents who well-meaningly try and set the agenda for their kids, but they put their kids under so much pressure that it actually puts the kid off sport, and in extreme cases can be massively detrimental to the kid. Look, there are times in my parenting life where I very much set the agenda. No, we're going to grandma's this afternoon. No, your room does need to be tidy before we leave. No, you will do your chores. So sometimes, as parents, rightly so, we set the agenda, we set the boundaries. But around sport, I particularly feel it's important that our kids get to set the agenda about how we behave with them around that encounter. And you might be surprised about what they say. So I'd really encourage you to kind of do that. The third thing I'd say is let's learn to sit with pain. As I said, I'm a church minister, so I have this ridiculous privilege of being able to support families at some of the most difficult and painful parts of their lives, divorce and bereavement being 2 of them. And as a young church minister, I used to think I had to say something deeply profound to fix this pain or to bring some kind of soothing. And I really quickly learned to shut up, you pray. The most important thing is just being there with people. And sometimes that is sitting in silence. And our kids will sometimes find sport really hard and painful. And that isn't a measure of their mental fortitude or resilience if they feel things emotionally. In fact, that's a myth that's been around for far too long, that resilient people aren't emotional. It's completely untrue. Resilient people are emotional. They just learn how to manage those emotions at different times. And so for some of your kids, they might get dropped from the team they like, or have a bad game, or lose to Oakham or whatever. And so the first 2 minutes of the car journey, they're a bit sulky and a bit annoyed, and then they're absolutely fine. Other kids, it might take a couple of days. And there's nothing about your child's mental fortitude that equals how long they might feel in pain and grief. Grief is a real thing. We need to let our kids express their grief, express their emotions, and go through the grief cycle rather than just try and fix it. And again, that's well-meaning love of parents just to rush in and try and fix kids' problems. But I think it's more important to let them sit with their pain so they realize that they're being noticed and cared for in sitting with the pain. And then when they're ready, we seek progress. And for your kids, that's just a simple question like, that obviously hurt. What can you do differently next time? And how can I help? And if they say, I don't want your help, I'm going to talk to Sir, you're like, cool, it sounds like you've got a plan. Or they might have a plan. Or you might say to them, that really hurt. I can see you don't want to talk about it now, but can we talk about it in a couple of days' time? So like a Wednesday at tea time, can we just have a chat about it? Or can I phone you and talk to you about it? And so the challenge is, and look, as parents, we never get this right. We're always going to slightly misfire with our timings on this, not always, but regularly misfire with our timings on that. That's part of the challenge of being a parent, is that we don't always quite land the timings right on this. But I think it's important we allow our kids to sit with their pain, and then we seek progress. And then lastly, we need to be ridiculously realistic. Our kids are that. They are kids. They're going to make mistakes. There isn't a professional player who represents their country who has perfect performances all the time. Teenagers, particularly going through puberty, just have immense challenges of the physical changes. Girls with their menstrual cycle starting and then getting used to understanding how to train and the physical changes that come with that, that affects performance. All the research now, thankfully, we haven't done enough research into that area, particularly into understanding how puberty affects girls in sport, but we're now starting to understand that a lot more. And we just need to be a lot more compassionate, a lot more just encouraging and supportive, and recognizing that sometimes their game will be completely off and sometimes it won't, and that's okay. And sometimes we'll know why, and sometimes we won't, because they're teenagers. So we just need to be really realistic. They're going to make terrible decisions on the sports pitch. They're probably going to make some terrible decisions off it. And if we in the car journey can recognize that our own emotional challenges about watching them perform badly, we can't use them as our kind of like safe space to offload our challenges by the questions that we ask. I think often parents use the car journey with their kids to release their own emotional frustration, rather than taking a deep breath, releasing your own emotional frustration, and then talking to your kid. I don't watch sport with the other parents on my son's teams. As human beings, I really like them. In the bar and the clubhouse afterwards, I really like them. When they're watching sport, they do my head in. I find it just too challenging. They're too old school, just scream and shout at the kids as they play. I go and stand on my own behind the post so that can process everything. I actually find watching rugby behind the post is far better anyway, but that's just a side note. And so that then I'm ready to talk to my kids, and I have dealt with that. And there's a little plug for my book. Look at that. There you go. It's pretty awesome. So we looked at kind of character-focused car journeys. We're going to look at the last thing. I'm looking forward to your questions in 5 or 6 minutes' time. And that is looking at character, is looking at how do you grow potential rather than making loads of noise about results. Okay, listen, parenting, I think, is one of the hardest jobs to do. How do you know you're being a successful parent? I think the only time we're going to know that we've been a successful parent is when they choose our nursing home. Up to that point, how do we actually know if we've done a good job or not? It's very, very hard to know. And so the challenge for parents is we kind of get hooked into little ways of measuring along the way. Look, they've won this cup, or they've got this grade at school. And there's nothing wrong with enjoying those things, by the way. There's nothing wrong with winning. In fact, winning should be an important part of a child's experience. But it's when we focus on those tangible results more than the process, the potential growing that's going on behind the scenes, nurturing that character and mindset skills, that's where it can become a bit unhealthy. Here's like what they call a test question, which is obviously got a right answer, and you're going to work out what I think the right answer is straight away. But one team hasn't lost a game all year. The other team has had mixed results. Which team has learned more? Okay, now I reckon when I ask this question in a room and ask people to put their hands up, because they're polite and they can work out what they think I think already, but most people say mixed results. We all love an unbeaten season, but what is the point in under 14s having an unbeaten season? It doesn't do anybody any good in the long term. And that's what we're talking about here, that long-term progression of feeding and nurturing habits, which will bear fruit in their 20s, 30s, 40s, but we can miss the nurturing of those by just focusing on the results in the younger years. And that's a challenge for both coaches and parents. A couple of weeks ago, I was with the England under-18 rugby team. They played Italy. In their boys' first international, and they played an Italy team that was nearly a whole year older than them, and they lost. And one of the reasons the coaches arranged that fixture is so that the kids were put under pressure, that they had a difficult game, because the coaches recognise that those lads, most of them go to really good private schools. They get to play some really top quality rugby where they win an awful lot, and it's important to learn what it is to lose and to be challenged. And it's a very supportive, caring environment, and they would have walked them through like that. And we've all seen things like this on Facebook, haven't we? You know, life is rarely straightforward, and I think we recognise that too. But I think when it comes to developing talent, I think, you know, some people think it's a straight line. I'm sure most of you recognise that it's kind of a bit up and down, but I think it's even more confusing. I think talent can look like a multiple number of things. And the challenge for us parents is not to freak out if they're having a bad couple of weeks or don't seem like they're making progress, but is to keep nudging and helping them develop some of their inner characteristics and drive that will help them be better at sport, but will also have lots of transferable skills in the long term, particularly the skills of self-awareness, thinking about their own game, thinking about how they can improve, thinking of mistakes not as something to take deeply personally, but just as a challenge to get around and to work around and to work on. I asked a bunch of, sorry, most of the things have been rugby tonight. That's not fair, is it? Because I work in lots of sports. But I asked a bunch of under 18 lads who are on the cusp of a professional contact question. Can you work out what the question is from looking at their answers? The more times an answer was given, the bigger the word got. So you're going to need to unmute. What do you think the question was?
What do you like about sports?
Yeah, that's good. That's close. It's close.
Why do you play rugby?
Why do you play rugby? Yeah, thank you. So it's close to the first one, but why do you play? Yeah, I love that. Enjoyment. They play for enjoyment. Now, enjoyment is a broad thing. Out of my three kids enjoy sport for different reasons. The oldest is one of these psychos who only believes a session is worthwhile if he comes off with his heart rate being as high as it can for the whole length of time and he's got nothing left in the tank. Caleb's super strength is hard work, and he can't stand sessions where he doesn't finish just ridiculously competitive hard work. My middle child is all about the social element of sport. In fact, when we did swimming lessons, I used to get so cross with her because she'd stand there chatting to her teacher and her swimming lesson buddies, letting them go first so she could carry on the conversation rather than getting on with the swimming lesson. I'm like, flipping heck, I'm spending a fortune on this, get in the pool and swim. But for her, sport was all about the social. And for the youngest, the gymnast, she's all about precision. So when she did swimming lessons, she didn't come out beetroot face like her brother did, but she put so much effort into making sure that her technique was perfect and flawless, which often meant that her times, when you look back over were quicker than her brothers were. I think the challenge for us as parents is how do we help them keep enjoying it without making these well-meaning mistakes of putting them under too much pressure, like those almosts, of making the car journey about our narrative rather than their narrative, and ultimately about focusing on results rather than processes, about allowing them the growth opportunity that come behind the results rather than focusing on whether the results actually mean anything or not. I hope you've enjoyed that tonight. Again, I'm just about to launch this well-meaning mistakes thing. There's a number of mistakes that we haven't talked about tonight. If you want to sign up for that, open wellmeaningmistakes.co.uk. It's free. We're trialing it at the moment with a few people, so there might be a few gremlins in the works, but you're welcome to go and have a look. And if you've got any thoughts or you want to ask me any questions, do go and check out nonperfectdad.co.uk or drop me an email. I'd love to hear from you. Right, I'm going to stop screen sharing there. I'm going to turn my camera back on. I'm still curious if the gentleman here is from the Ivo in St Ives, Huntingdonshire. I'd love to know the answer. I'll tell you why, because I went to Hinchinbrook, so they were my local derby school when I was a kid. So cool. Right, what questions do people have? What thoughts? What do you want to follow up on that?
Hello, Richard.
Hi,
It's, David, a tennis parent. Hello, Richard.
Hi, David. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah, okay. Do you think we have a bit of a preparation more for a sort of emotional control rather than tactical or game plan? Do you think the car journey can be a bit late though for that?
A bit late for what? Sorry, I missed you because some people were leaving and it kind of made some noise. A bit late for the emotional
preparation for an emotional plan, rather than a game plan, or a tactics plan. Do you think the car journey is a bit late to be sort of putting new ideas onto your son or daughter?
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I wouldn't put any ideas in my kids' heads except go have fun and be yourself. That's the only thing I would say in the car on the way there. My kids tend to. Sorry if that wasn't clear earlier. No, I would never give tactics. If they're like, I've got these work-ons, can you remind me of that? Yeah, I might give them that if they want to. Might, if they're saying to me, "Oh, my son played his first team game on Saturday and their fly half was missing. So Caleb said he'd play fly half, which takes a lot of guts because he's never played fly half before. And he was like, "Oh, I'm going to get smashed up today," and things like that. And I was like, "Well, you may do, but remember your super strength." So I was just trying to remind him. I was just acting as a bit of a mirror in that conversation. But no, I wouldn't introduce tactics on the way or on the way home. Really, I think. I mean, tennis is interesting because tennis parents tend to have a bit more involvement than, say, some team sports. But I certainly wouldn't get into technical or tactical on the way or on the way back unless they initiate that. And even if they do, I would just keep asking questions.
Keep it general with 1 or 2 pointers where all the hard work's been done, obviously.
Yeah, totally. And if they don't know those pointers in the car journey, to be honest with you, they're not worth saying anyway. So, I think. If when you say to them, what's the best thing I can do for you on game day or training day, and they say, "Oh, just in the car, can you just ask me some questions about what I need to be working on?" You're like, "Okay, cool. Which questions?" That's fine. But I would just let them DJ, let them listen to their music. Don't
ensure my headphones are charged, so I don't have to listen to you.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I let my kids choose the music. We have a good rock out. Sometimes it's pretty awful rap music, but I have to swallow that. But I like to just join in. Caleb once listened to Backstreet Boys all the way. I was like, I recognise this, but I can't think why. And then I realised he was listening to Backstreet. I was like, "You weirdo! I'm really worried about you right now." But anyway, yes, it is just let them set that agenda, David.
Yeah, thank you.
I hope that answers the question. Good question. Who's got another question for us?
Can I ask you about the feeling of injustice after a game? So, if something hasn't gone right, maybe it's a referee decision or it's a foul or some behaviour that shouldn't have happened, and your child's pretty rattled because that's not how it should have been. What's your advice with response to that, really?
That's a great question. Elle, I think your letter.
Oh, I'm sorry, Lynn.
Lynn. Oh yeah, no, it is on there. Lynn. Yes, Lynn. Great question. So I think that's really hard for us as parents because if we've seen it, we tend to feel that injustice as well. So I think the first thing to do is in your own head, recognize your own feelings about that really quickly and kind of commit to not piling on your own feelings onto theirs as well. I think the best thing you can do, Lynn, is just listen. If anybody, you'll know this, Lynn, I'm sure occasionally you get a little bit angry and a little bit ratty about things in life. And the last thing you want someone to say is, "Calm down, it's just a game, the ref's a good person." So I think letting them just vent and just kind of go, making the okay, yeah, well, thanks for sharing, thanks for being honest conversation. I think that's all you can do in that moment. That's just sitting with the pain bit. Yeah. If they calm down pretty quickly after sharing it, you might want to come back and go, "Oh, that's it. That vexed you quite a bit. Is that healthy, letting it vex you like that? How might you handle that differently? How might you reframe that challenge, etc., etc." So yeah, my son hates the injustice of the referee. Oh my word, and he knows from me. Hopefully, I give the listening thing. But a couple of days later, I'll go, "Mate, you're really angry in the car. Yeah, well, yeah, the ref made some shocking decisions, but to be honest with you, not as many as your team did. You could have won that game without the ref's bad decision. So I wouldn't necessarily feed that back in that moment, because that's not healthy for them. But I would feed that back, because I'm one of these big things. I think we now live in a kind of excuse victim mentality. Kind of, particularly parents are really good at making their kids just the victims of deep perpetration injustices of like a ref. But when you think about it, you know, it's not. I love the way you use the word injustice, because that's how it feels. It feels like a big injustice, doesn't it? And I think another injustices are, I didn't get to play in my favourite position. Sir subbed me off for someone I didn't think was as good as me. The opposition cheated because they did whatever for altered birth certificates, so played some bigger older kids or whatever. You know, there's lots of potential injustices around sport, which at the time feel massive, but with a little bit of daylight between that moment or whatever can feel a bit better. And there have been occasions where I think, oh yeah, that was actually pretty unfair, and I'll agree with my son. Yeah, that was unfair. That feels unfair. But ultimately, I'll then bring it back to his responsibility or her responsibility a bit later on. I find that really hard with gymnastics, because like Anya will tell me they lost like half a point because her foot was half a degree out, and I just don't understand it. So it's a bit trickier in that I just listen. So yeah, I think listen, nod, don't try not to pile in, because that can be really unhelpful, particularly around officials, because officials don't go out to make mistakes. And I think helping kids realize that officials are just like humans, they make mistakes as well, and you just have to work around that and influence that. So one of the things I work on with my son is how can he influence the ref in a healthy way, not in a bad sport way, but in a kind of like, so for me, influencing the ref is going and saying hello and shaking the person's hand and thanking them for coming today straight away, and you know, and having a bit of a joke with them and a bit of a laugh with them, and you know, just treating them as a human being, because if you do that, you get better results out of their whistle. It's just known fact. I mean, you watch the professionals do it, they'll all try and do the same thing. So I think you can have conversations with your kids around how do they influence some of those challenges, but ultimately those big injustices, saying suck it up in the car probably is unhealthy. You might want to have a suck it up later on conversation, but just letting them. Yeah, does that make sense? That was
Thanks very much. Yeah, very much. Thank you.
Good question though. Good question. Has anyone else got a question?
Rich, I've just got one. I just found it quite interesting. I'm not a parent myself. I have the pleasure of teaching many of the children of the lovely people that have joined us this evening instead. You sort of touched on the car journey, and obviously you've got the outraged child who wants to get everything off their chest straight away. What do you do with, or what advice do you have for the more reserved boy or girl who actually it's eating them up so bad inside, and they just don't want to sit there? Because to be fair to the pupils that we have at the schools, they're incredibly well mannered and incredibly polite, that I'd find it very rare that they'd certainly do anything like that with a teacher. But I quite like the idea of them being able to voice their opinions. What kind of stimulants or triggers do you have to sort of eke some of those frustrations out of them, so it's a shared frustration, not one that's just keeping them awake at night?
Mate, that's a great question. I mean, I think working with teenagers, I think we particularly silence teenage boys. I'm not saying the school do, but we particularly silence teenage boys. There are a number of tools that I use with parents and kids. I think just asking people to give something a score is really useful. Out of 10, how would you score that? Out of 10, how would you score the ref? If you thought the ref had a shocker and no one thought, out of 10, how would you score them? Write it down on a bit of paper, or go and stand near a number or whatever, just so you make them do something physical. I have a big box of buttons and keys, which I know sounds weird. They're just a big bunch of random buttons or keys. And I'm like, kids, go and pick a button that sums up today's session. Tell me why you picked that button. And, you know, there's no right or wrong button, and the buttons are just buttons. I mean, the kids look at you like you're a weirdo when you do that, but it gets conversation going. There's a great board game called Compatibility. I don't know if there are many left, because I think I bought every set off eBay, but it's a bunch of playing cards which have just got pictures on. And I just give young people pictures, particularly because I do a lot of mentoring with young people from quite dysfunctional families, so some of them are quite traumatized and closed down. You give them a bunch of playing cards. Oh, what football team do you support, mate? Oh, I support Man United. Okay, pick 3 cards that sum up Man United. Okay, cool. Well, tell me about your school day. Pick 3 cards that sum up your school day. They pick 3 cards. oh, why'd you pick that card? We've got a conversation going. So obviously, I'm not suggesting every parent has a pack of cards, a box of buttons, and a box of keys in their car. But I think silence is okay. Introverts are okay because, you know, we're a society set up for big gobby gits like me, and that's not very fair on those who just don't share a lot. I think in team meetings and things like that, it's really important that obviously yourself and your staff give the opportunity to the introverts to speak and to not to put them on the spot in front of the extroverts. I think that's really unhealthy, but finding methods and tools of doing that. And for parents, I think sometimes the quiet ones probably just want a little bit more time to think about it. So again, that tactic of, can we talk about it on Wednesday? I like what's happened there. Can we talk about it on Wednesday? For parents, I suppose my best tactic is get granny or grandpa to give them a ring and ask them how the game was. Because like you just said, kids are polite, and I reckon these lovely parents, a lot of kids will be polite to their grandparents, and you just eavesdrop. So there are times in my kids' lives where they're not that keen to talk to me because there's stuff going on. But if I get granny or pops on the phone, I know I'm going to be able to eavesdrop exactly how they feel, and they'll tell granny and pops, and I might prompt granny and pops, oh, they had a frustrating day. And because my parents have no filter or no kind of subtlety, they'd be like, oh, you had a frustrating, dad says you had a frustrating day. So I'd get a glare from my kid, but they'd still tell granny and pops why and how they were feeling about it. So that's one of my cool tactics. If your kid isn't feeling like chatting to you, get their grandparents to get involved. That's particularly helpful. Daniel has confessed it is that Ivo. Cool, Daniel. I hear that Ivo are now particularly good at sport compared to Hinchinbrook, which is a bit of a turnaround. Cool. Anybody got any other questions?
Richard, I have. It's Mike Coates. My son's a football player, so apologies to the school. Despite sending him to Stanford, he still plays football. and he always seeks feedback after every game. And I never know how honest to be. You know, we've tried the scoring mechanism, and we've tried because I played at a reasonably good level. I was nowhere near as good as him, but I won't tell him that. So how honest should you be, Richard, do you think?
What do you think?
Well, I think you should be honest and give it to him all guns. But I never know whether that's right. He reacts really well to it, but I'm just seeking comfort because I'm not the perfect dad.
None of us are, mate. None of us are. It's a great question. Yes, I mean, if you go and look on my YouTube, there's a YouTube video there of Billy and Mako Villapona's mum, Singa Vinapola, working, she talks about how brutally honest she is with her son when he gets dropped from England. I mean, not brutally honest, but it's clear that they have a very strong foundation of relationship across other parts of their parenting. So I think if you're going to be brutally honest in some areas, you need to make sure you're just sitting down, chilling out, watching TV, having a bit of fun, having a bit of banter elsewhere, so that balances that out. I think if you just always, there's no, I don't know you at all. So, but if you're just brutally honest all the time, I think that's unhelpful. I would be. How old's your son, Mike?
He's 15, coming up to 16.
15, coming up to 16. So the research does tell us that when kids reach those teen years, they do start again to ask their parents tactical advice. My son certainly does. He knows I get to hang out with some good coaches. So he is starting to ask me more tactical advice than he has done in the last couple of years. But I would be curious as to why he's hungry for your advice. And I might, if I were you, start to play a little bit of a game with him that he knows. Just be honest with him. Go, oh, you always ask for my advice. Okay, why is that? Is he seeking your approval in asking your advice?
No,
or genuinely asking your advice to get better?
I think he's generally asking my advice to get better.
Cool. Then I would limit it to one thing if you're going to be bluntly honest about one thing, and I would ask him what he thinks first.
Yeah, always do that.
Yeah, so, and then to be honest with you, he'll name the stuff he knows he did badly, and you don't have to name it that often, is my guess, because he's probably, if he's asking for good feedback, I would ask him to keep a notebook, so he started to notice common themes and things like that, because I think that's the next phase. If he's in a pathway, maybe they're producing video footage for him to have a look at as well, and you can watch that video footage together. But again, I would try and keep him in the driving seat of that advice. Yeah. Not because your advice is wrong, but because he has to develop the self-skill of not hearing from dad, because in 2 years' time he's going to be hopefully flying the nest and off and doing his own thing. So, sorry?
Sooner than that, hopefully.
Yeah. So you want him to be developing the skills of good questioning himself. But yeah, look, he loves you and he respects the fact that that you played, and so yeah, that would be why he's asking that advice. That is a good question. I think we do have to be honest with them, but I think we have to mix that honesty with an awful lot of praise and quality time with them.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
I think we've got time for one more before I do have to be a parent and get a kid to a sporting club.
I've seen Mr. Jeremy Ford in my top left. I think has been out of his seat a couple of times to try and ask a question. Sorry if I put you on the spot there, Jeremy. I didn't know if you had one.
Yeah, it's just about, it's for teachers as well, really. I mean, there was a stage last year where my son was getting frustrated that he wasn't getting picked. So I was saying, well, you keep applying yourself, it'll come. And I don't want to be that parent. So I did speak to the teacher in charge of sports, said that this is completely your call. If you think he's ready, he's really trying hard and would love to step up. I'm not putting any pressure on you, but it would be nice to see him get picked for his hard work if you think he's working hard enough. And I think that was the right message, because I wasn't picking his battles for him and making him get in the team. My message to him was, well, work hard and it will come. But sometimes in the background you do need to give a little push as well, don't you?
Is that whiteboard behind you your 17 points on why your son should be selected? Is that that's what you did on the Zoom? No, I think, look, that's really difficult. I think I might phrase it, I might do it slightly differently, and I would be try and get the kid to go to the teacher and have the conversation. Yeah. And then if that's not working, then I might have a conversation with the teacher that goes something like, we're just a bit curious about selection. They're working hard. They feel like, is it possible to help them know what they need to be working on? Or can you be honest with them and say, you're hoping to get into, what sport are you talking about there, Jeremy? That was cricket. Okay, so you're hoping to get into the cricket team, but actually there just are 3 or 4 bowlers or batsmen at the moment who are significantly better than your son, and at the, he will get his chance, but at the moment, the reality is he isn't in our top whatever. I think most coaches that I meet want to be kind to kids, and so sometimes they're not good at having that honest conversation with the kids around that. But I would certainly want to help my kid have the confidence to go and ask that conversation with the teacher. And part of some of the work I do in other workshops is talking to parents through how to kind of practice those conversations with your kid, because again, that's the same. That's a skill they're going to need later on in life. Boss, what is going on here? Partner, business partner, life partner. We don't seem to be faring well here. What's going on? So yes, I don't think many coaches will mind well, I mean, I've got the same challenge at the moment. My son is in the Saracens pathway. He's not making the A team of the bit that he's in, but I know all the coaches because I do lots of work with them. And it's really hard when they message me going, oh, Caleb had a good time last night. And I want to go, yeah, he did. And he's really keen to get into the top. But I've resisted that because I just think, well, they know he is because he works really hard in training and it's obvious that he wants to. But yeah, as a dad, I really want to go, come on, why isn't he in that team yet? I think he's probably good enough. But I know he is asking them, what do I need to improve on? And they are giving him tips. And I just think, well, he just may not be good enough. And that's that. But yeah, thank you. Good question. Sir, is it okay if we finish there? Because
yeah, absolutely, Richard. I think that's just been such a fascinating insight, particularly for a non-parent, as I am, I hope anyway, to have that information and to have that sort of, to give those tools to those of you that are watching. Please do contact myself. I'm sure you've all got my emails by now. I've probably spammed your inboxes with team sheets for the weekends. Richard's Twitter handle is @nonperfectdad if you want to get in touch with him. There is a recording of this that I've done, and I'll put that somewhere that's not in the public domain as per Richard's request, but I'll make sure that that you can all get access. So if you wouldn't mind just joining me with a round of applause and a thank you for Richard. Richard, great to see you, mate. Take care, everyone.
Thanks very much.